One of my absolute favorite things to do on this channel is to study units that have dramatically improved over the course of a season or two, and no unit is more qualified for this type of assessment than the New York Jets defense. Prior to the 2021 season, the Jets hired former San Francisco 49ers defensive coordinator Robert Saleh, who was just 1 year removed from leading the best defense in football to a Super Bowl appearance. Coach Saleh brought hope of a new and improved Jets defense to New York, a defense that could finally make the Jets relevant again. But things didn't go as planned in that first season under the new regime. In 2021, the Jets were dead last in points allowed. They ranked 28th in yards per play allowed, they were 31st in yards per pass attempt allowed, and 22nd in yards per rush attempt allowed. In pretty much any category that you could come up with, the Jets were near or at the bottom of the league. They struggled to stop the run consistently, they couldn't stop anything through the air, and Coach Saleh found himself in a do-or-die situation after just one season. But he would rise to the occasion. After a roster overhaul and an offseason to adjust, Coach Saleh and the Jets defense outperformed even the loftiest of expectations, finishing the season at 4th in points allowed and 2nd in yards per play allowed. In just one offseason, the Jets managed to go from a bottom 5 defense to arguably the best in the league. So today, I'm going to explain to the best of my ability how they did it. Let me start by taking you all the way back to the 2021 offseason when Coach Saleh first took over as head coach in New York. The defensive personnel that Saleh inherited was, for lack of a better term, bad. And with only one offseason to make moves at the beginning of a rebuild, the front office couldn't add much talent prior to that 2021 season. In an effort to get the absolute most out of what he had, Saleh made a significant departure from the schematic principles that defined his 49ers defenses in previous years. In 2021, the Jets operated primarily out of one high safety shells. They played a lot of man coverage relative to the rest of the league, and blitzed at a higher rate than what was typical out of a solid defense. Tendency-wise, the Jets defense of 2021 was more closely aligned with Jets defenses of previous years, led by Quinnen Williams, than with Saleh's 49ers defenses. The approach was much more aggressive than what we're used to seeing from Coach Saleh, and this approach made the Jets defense painfully predictable. The Jets' use of one high safety shells prevented them from being outgapped against the run, meaning the numbers usually favored the defense in the run game. In fact, the Jets deployed a light box just 41% of the time in 2021, which was the lowest rate in the entire league. But this philosophy limits what the defense can do coverage-wise. This play from back in Week 13 of that 2021 season against Philadelphia should give you an idea of what I mean. The single high safety shell makes it almost impossible for New York to call anything that isn't cover 3 or cover 1. Sometimes you'll see teams have an apex defender rotate into a deep half in an effort to split the field, but the Jets almost never made any calls with that level of ambiguity. Plus, taking a defender out of the box would defeat the purpose of deploying one high shell in the first place, which wouldn't make much sense on a second down and short like this. So because of that single high shell, Philadelphia can confidently assume that New York is in a middle of field closed coverage. The cornerback aligned to the bottom of your screen hints at a zone call because he's aligned over a tight end, and that zone identifier is confirmed when Dallas Goedert goes in motion without being followed. So now, Philadelphia knows that New York is in cover 3, and that call will isolate Jets linebacker CJ Mosley on Goedert, which exceeds the criteria of a mismatch. Philadelphia's route concept told Goedert to run a deep crossing route underneath the post safety, and the other tight end, Tyree Jackson, to occupy the wide corner with an out route. After the snap, Goedert torches Mosley at the point of contact, and survives a hit from the post safety on his way to a 36-yard touchdown. This aggressive approach was applied to run defense as well. The Jets posted a run stuff rate of 22.9% in 2021, which was actually very good relative to the rest of the league. This is the only relevant statistical category in which the Jets regressed in 2022. But this stat is much more indicative of scheme than performance. Just because they were aggressive against the run doesn't mean that they were good, and their approach to run defense really hurt them when the offense didn't run the ball. The second-level defenders were so committed to stopping the run that they would get absolutely gashed by play-action concepts, which was especially evident in the 54-point beating they took from New England in Week 7. On this second down from late in the first half, New York predictably called cover 3 from a one-high shell, which New England attacked with a sail concept off of draw action. The delayed run fake kept the eyes of the second-level defenders in the backfield as the concept began to develop. So by the time those defenders knew that the quarterback still had the ball, they couldn't get enough depth to cover the downfield receivers without turning their backs to the ball. This is called robot technique, and it's what these defenders are coached to do. The problem here was when those defenders turned their backs to the ball, they allowed the running back to leak out into the flat and pick up an easy 28 yards. You can see what happens when these defenders don't robot to get as much depth as possible on this play from later in that same game. Here, New York's single high shell again forced them into a middle of field closed coverage, which New England attacked with another play action concept. I want you to pay close attention to Jets safety Ashton Davis, who's aligned as the weak side apex defender. Post-snap, Davis got sucked up toward the line of scrimmage by the play-action fake, and as soon as he saw the ball, he should have made an effort to get depth as quickly as possible. Instead, he backpedaled until the ball was in the air and watched it go right over his head into the hands of Hunter Henry. In addition to the predictability that comes as a result of this defensive approach, it creates damned if you do, damned if you don't situations for defenders, especially those who align at the second level. Now, schematic deficiencies obviously played a significant role in this defense's issues in 2021, but no matter what Coach Saleh did scheme-wise, it wasn't going to make much of a difference. I mean, when you have Brandon Echols and Bryce Hall lining up at wide corner, receivers like Stephon Diggs are gonna torch you over and over again. This was always as much a personnel issue as it was a scheme issue. So New York completely overhauled their defense over the offseason prior to week 1 of 2022. The wide corners were replaced by Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed, who were both massive upgrades. They added Jordan Whitehead to start at safety. Quinnen Williams was finally ready to reach his full potential with a healthy Carl Lawson next to him, and the additions of pass rushers Jermaine Johnson and Michael Clemens in the draft. These roster moves allowed Coach Saleh to venture back into the less aggressive, more modern scheme that he ran in San Francisco. In 2022, New York posted a significant increase in the rate at which they deployed two high safety shells, which allowed for much more diversity in their coverage calls. Instead of being limited to primarily middle of field closed looks, the Jets were able to deploy closed and open coverage looks at a nearly even rate. Now, I want you to take a look at this play from back in week 3 against Cincinnati. New York came out in a two high shell, and from this look, they can roll into dozens of different coverage variations. They could call a traditional zone coverage like Tampa 2 or cover 4. They could split the field and play straight quarters or quarter half. They could drop into a number of different variations of cover 3. The point is, the offense can't declare what they're going to see after the snap with any degree of certainty. So the quarterback is forced into a quick and decisive post-snap process. Joe Burrow has to identify the coverage and know where to exploit it in the 2 or 3 seconds he has before he reaches the top of his dropback. Here, the Jets called quarters, and Cincinnati called a play-action scissors concept, which tells the number 1 and number 2 receivers at the top of your screen to run a post route and a corner route, respectively. The concept is designed to stretch the middle hook defender vertically, but by the time Joe Burrow reaches the top of his dropback, he's under heavy pressure. Quinnen Williams' breakout, along with the other improvements to New York's defensive line, allowed them to make more conservative coverage calls like this. They could rush 4 from a 2-high structure, keep the quarterback guessing as to what they were going to do coverage-wise, and still rely on the big guys up front to generate pressure. Because of those coverage calls, quarterbacks were often forced to reach their second, third, and fourth reads, but couldn't do so before Quinnen Williams or Carl Lawson or Bryce Huff was in their face. This nasty defensive line also allowed New York to take that extra safety out of the box on early downs without worrying about getting gashed by the run, because they now had a guy up front who they could consistently rely on to play 2 gaps at the same time and keep the linebackers free. This approach hurt their run stuff rate a bit, but despite having a numbers advantage up front way less often in 2022 than in 2021, the Jets were a much better team against the run on the aggregate. In addition to ranking 9th overall in yards per carry allowed, the Jets also ranked 12th in defensive adjusted line yards, which is a stat tracked by Football Outsiders that calculates on average how many yards the offensive line creates for the ball carrier. The Jets weren't necessarily dominant against the run, but they were very good for a team that operates primarily out of 2 high safety coverage shells. From these 2 high looks, the second-level defenders no longer had to worry so much about getting depth against play action, because intermediate crossing routes could be blanketed by one of those 2 deep safeties. Here's an example of what I mean from back in week 13 against Minnesota. The Vikings called a 3-level flood concept off of wide zone action, which is designed to stretch the defenders on one side of the formation vertically. And I want you to visualize this as if New York were in a 1 high safety shell rather than the 2 high shell they deployed here. That would put the strong side safety in the box for run support, and the weak side safety in the deep middle of the field. When the offensive linemen each take a play side step, the second level defenders must respect the threat of a wide zone handoff by flowing toward the ball. The concept tells the number 1 and number 2 receivers on the strong side of the formation to flow against those linebackers, and the number 1 on the opposite side to carry the wide corner deep. Ideally, for the offense, the box safety, along with the Sam and Mike linebackers, would be too far displaced to match either of the crossing receivers, which puts a high-low stretch on the will linebacker. Whichever receiver he leaves open is the one that Kirk Cousins will target as he rolls right. But because New York was operating out of a too-high shell, they were able to shut this concept down with ease. And you can see why by paying close attention to the weak side safety, LaMarcus Joyner. Joyner doesn't have to worry about the vertical route from Justin Jefferson here because he knows that the opposite side safety is there to offer Sauce Gardner inside help. So Joyner undercuts the intermediate crossing route from Adam Thielen. That prevents the will linebacker, Quan Alexander, from being forced into a bind, and allows Alexander, along with CJ Mosley, to take the tight end on the underneath cross. With leverage favoring the defense everywhere and pressure in his face, Kirk Cousins wisely decides to throw the ball away. Brett Rippon wasn't so wise back in Week 7 when he turned the ball over in a similar situation. Denver called a similar 3-level flood concept off of wide zone action, but with a run fake that flowed with the receivers. Just like on the last play, LaMarcus Joyner blanketed the crossing route from depth and was rewarded with an interception. Coach Saleh has found great success in once again taking more of a conservative approach thanks to his new and improved defensive line. But there is one very significant element of this scheme that we did not see in San Francisco, and that's press man coverage. Back in 2019, when San Francisco went to the Super Bowl, the 49ers barely ran cover 1. They called it 77 times, which was the second lowest total in the league. Keep in mind that this was back before teams had abandoned replicating the cover 3 Legion of Boom defensive structure. So cover 1 was much more common 3 years ago than it is now. In 2022, the Jets called cover 1 127 times, which was the 12th highest total in the league. Back in San Francisco, Saleh's defensive line was even better than the group he has in New York, and his defensive backs were best fit for a zone-heavy scheme. But now Saleh has Sauce Gardner, and neglecting to run some physical press coverage with Sauce lining up at wide corner would be sacrilegious. So Saleh altered his scheme to include more press man calls, especially on third down. New York called cover 1 on third down 52 times in 2022, a total that ranked 4th highest in the league, and some of those plays have allowed us to see just how special Sauce is. Here, New England is facing third and short, and the defense is presenting an obvious press man look, so the Patriots countered with a mesh concept. The concept calls for intersecting shallow crossing routes from the number 1 receivers on each side of the formation. Nelson Agholor is coached to set a pick on Sauce to allow Tyquan Thornton to come open underneath and pick up the first down after the catch. But post-snap, Sauce works over the top of the pick, closes in on Thornton with speed, and punches the ball out to force an incompletion. He made it look pretty seamless, but this is not normal. A guy who's as big as Sauce isn't supposed to be able to move like this. I mean, he worked over the top of a pick to catch up to Tyquan Thornton, who, in case you forgot, ran a 4.28 at the combine. New England had an all but perfect call in this situation. It should have been a first down. Sauce is just a variable that you can't beat with scheme. But it's more than just athleticism that makes him such a unique talent. Sauce is also an absolute technician in man coverage, and this rep from Week 18 against Miami is a great example of that technique in action. New York again called cover 1 with Sauce pressed up on Tyreek Hill at the bottom of your screen. Now, there's a lot that goes into this rep, so I'm going to slow it down and take you through step by step. The first thing I want you to notice is that pre-snap, Sauce's eyes are glued to the ball when pretty much every other coverage defender has their eyes on their man. This allows Sauce to be the aggressor in the matchup. The moment the ball is snapped, he fakes a jam at the line of scrimmage. In anticipation of contact at the line, Tyreek Hill flinches back, which completely ruins any plan he had for his release. Sauce then establishes outside leverage and maintains that leverage advantage through the entire route to funnel Hill toward the inside help. When Hill attempts to break outside, he's forced to work through Sauce's frame and is unable to create any separation. Thanks to Quinnen Williams and company, Coach Saleh has been able to return to his comfort zone scheme-wise. But thanks to Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed, but especially Sauce Gardner, Saleh has been able to rise above his own scheme and create a unit that is not only dominant, but also versatile. Now the Jets have the offensive personnel to complement this loaded defense. And for the first time in a decade, they're tooled up to bring AFC playoff football back to New Jersey. Before you go, I have a quick announcement to make regarding some upcoming content that will be featured on my Patreon page, which is linked at the top of the description. Over the summer, I will be watching and evaluating every rookie who was picked in the first round last year. Some of those guys will be covered on the channel, but I can't make a full-length video on each and every one. So those who aren't covered over here will be covered with a write-up on my Patreon based on a 5 or 6 game evaluation. All it takes is $1 a month to gain access to all of my work over there, and it's a great way to support the channel. But that's all I've got for now. As always, thank you guys so much for watching today's video. I will be back soon with something. Not sure what I'm going to cover next at the moment, but you'll know soon enough. So until then, peace.